Hello everyone. In today's video, we will be exploring the Spring Cloud config. There are two parts of it. One is the server side and another is the client side. So the server side is where we store all the configurations that client can use. Config server serves two purposes. One is to externalize the properties and another is to manage properties at the central location. The properties that we store can be stored at many different places. So for example, you can store the properties into the Git, or it can also allow you to store property into somewhere into AWS or some other cloud. It can also allow you to store property somewhere on your local machine as well. So file system backend as well. So it provides you so many different options. Also you can add encryption, decryption to the property. You also can add actuator and securities and quite a lot of things you can do with a config server. So it is very important that we understand the concept of the config server, and we also will look into the concepts of the config client as well. So to get started and without wasting time, let us start going into creating the config server and understand it better. First, we will look into a config server. So for that, I can go into Spring Initializr and we can go ahead and create a config server. So I can give some group ID. Let me give you a group ID as a cup of Java tag, and I will say the name as artifacts as a config server, Spring Cloud config. So let me give some better name instead of cloud config. Okay, so I will use the latest stable version 3.4.2 and I will do the Maven repository, and I can use 17 Java 17. So now if I look at a POM that it generates is something like this. I think I also need to add one dependency, that is a cloud config. So cloud config, that is a central management for configuration via Git, SVN or HashiCorp Vault. So I will select that. Now if I explore this, it has got a parent as a Spring Boot starter parent. Then it added these artifacts and group ID. Then if I look at it, it is using the Spring Cloud version as a 2024, and it has added the dependency of the Spring Cloud server, and as a management dependency it has added the Spring Cloud dependency. So let me go ahead and download that and unzip that. So I have got these. I will download somewhere into, so somewhere here I will download. I will unzip and then we can import that into a GitHub in a STS. So I'll go into the STS and import that. So now browse, I'll go here and I will import this. So it will take some time to import the projects. After a while, my project got imported successfully. And again, if I look into the POM, it has got a parent as a Spring Boot starter. Then it has got a Spring Cloud config server, and this is it. So this is all is needed for the config server. Now we can start looking into the application.properties. So let me convert that into YAML. So I'll refactor it and I will say YAML. So I prefer using YAML than properties. So I have this. So I have got this. Then I will just leave. So my config server is ready. And now what I can do is I will also add the server dot port. I want to run this on the server dot port as 8080. Okay, I think the properties did not get imported properly. Okay, so I want to 8071. I want to run on the server on the port 8071. So this is a bare minimum thing we added. So far we have done is to set up a Spring Boot project. Now we will start adding stuff for config server. So the first thing that we need is to enable the config server, and the way we can do is into the Spring Boot application, the main class, we just go ahead and add enable config server, and this will enable the config server. Now another thing that we need is to tell config server from where it will pick up the property. So we can go into the application.yaml and we can add the required dependency or require the properties that we need for making this Spring Boot application that act as a config server. So the first thing that we will do is we have to add a profiles.active. So what is your active profile? And my active profile is, if first we will try to use a configuration that we want to fetch from the class path. So we can say native. Okay, then we also need some detail that we need to provide detail about cloud config server native and search location. So here we will provide from where we will fetch our configuration. Okay, and we will provide some class path from where we can fetch this configuration. So what I'll do is I will create one folder into resources, that is config, and here I will provide the name of the place from where I will be fetching the configuration. So this is a class path name, so I will say class path config. So now if I put any property here, then it will start using that property and we should be able to fetch this property through some REST endpoint. Now what we will do is I will create some file into the config folder and we will try to run the project and we'll try to access those values. So I will create one file, let's say my file.yaml. Okay, and here my file and value val1, and I will say default my val1. Again I will add one more value. Okay, so now I have added two values here, and we will try to access this value through the REST endpoint. So I will start the project and let us see. So now my project is starting. Now it is started. So I can access this endpoint my value through a REST endpoint, and the REST endpoint would be exposing at the port 8071. So if I go here and browser and will try to access these values, let me go to the browser. So I have this browser, localhost 8071, and I say my file. Okay, and this is the default value. So if you look at it, I am able to fetch all the values that I entered into YAML myvalue.yaml file. Now let me do one more thing. I will create one more file with some more extension. Let's say I want to create the property for dev environment. Okay, and I will say dev. Similarly, I want to create the property for some other environment. Let's say I want to create the property for a prod environment. Okay, so I will say prod, and now let me restart the server. So the server has been restarted. I'll go to the browser and I want to fetch the property of dev. So the way we can fetch is to give the name of the file and then whatever I have given after the dash that I use here. And look at this. So I also get the default properties that I had provided, and I also get the default property, and I also get the dev property as well. If I give the name prod, so I should be able to see a prod property and the default property as well. So this is how we should be able to fetch property through some REST endpoint. So what we did so far, we created a POM and added a dependency for the config server, Spring Cloud config server. Then we went into the Spring, the main property, this is application main property, and added the annotation, that is enable config server. Now I went inside application.yaml and I wanted to fetch a property from somewhere into my class path. So I provided details of that. So here I provided a detail of the profile that I want to use. So when you want to use the local your machine local path, you have to use the profile as a native, and then you can access using the class path config. So this is all we need, and then we added some property here, and we are able to access this property using the server name, that is server port, and also using file name and the extension. So the extension that we use is with dot dash. So this is how, like if you have got multiple the application running. Let's say I have got a application for the flight service, I have got a application that is running for the passenger service, I have got some application that is running some other module, let's say the some other module. So you can have multiple modules, and for each of that you can provide those property right inside your server where you have stored. Once you store that, you should be able to use those property. So we look into the server, and now let us try to see what is the application of this. And if you look at it, when I started the config server, what it did is, it is telling that okay, I have added these properties here. So it has added the my file dev property, my file, then my file property, and these are all the files that it has added. So this is all we need for the config server. So let us start looking into how we can use this feature of the Spring Cloud config server into the application. So for that, what I have done is, what I will do is, in my GitHub repository I have got a multiple project. So if I look at it, I can go into, let's say I have got a one project for K8s. So here I have got a few applications like flight service, passenger service, and ticket service. So what I will do is, I will download this repository, downloads this module, and I will use this module into my config server, and we will see how we can use the config server to fetch the properties. Behind the scene, I have downloaded all the three projects and just imported those. So some of the changes I had to do, so I did that. So first of all, it was on the previous version, so I updated to the latest version that I want to use. Then another thing that I have done is, I just added the dependency. I just have commented it for now to show you something else. So the dependency that we may need for to create the config client, I have to add a Spring Cloud starter config. This is the dependency that I need to add to activate the Spring Cloud config client. Now the reason that I want to use this full-fledged project is because there are quite a lot of properties that it is using. For example, the server port, then it is using some default property, then it is using some database properties, right? Then it is using some H2 data, because I am internally, this project is using the H2 database. So if you look at it, it has got a quite a JPA dependency and web dependency, H2 dependency, then Lombok and Guava, quite a lot of, because it is a full-fledged web project. Then it is using the JPA, some of the JPA dependency, and some SQL related dependencies. So there are quite a lot of properties that I am using. So I'll be able to start this project, okay, because I have disabled this config server dependencies. So if you look at it, the server got started. So here it has used the the database dependencies. Then it also have the some starting at the port 8100. Then it is adding this H2 database dependency and all these things. Now my purpose is to use this server, use this property. I don't want to keep this all the property on my flight service applications. I want to transfer this property into my config server, and from this config server I want to use this property. So how we can do it? For example, first thing we need is to I'll stop this server flight application. And similarly to this one, I have got a passenger service application, and similar to I've got a ticket service applications. All three applications are very similar. So what I need to do is I need to take this property from here into a server, config server. So I will remove this my file, all these files. I don't need those files. I will remove and just copy this. So I copied it. But if I want to add multiple module properties, I cannot use application.properties. So what I have to do is I have to use the same name that I have used here. So what is the application name? What is the application name that I have used? So application name is flight service, right? So I have to use the same name here. So I think I will use the same name here and I will add it right here. So I'll change this name to flight service instead of flight service like this. So I will use the same name that I am using here, and so the name is now flight service, right? So I have got all the properties. Some of the properties I can remove. For example, I don't want to add the application name here because it can pick up this application name from the original, the application.yaml. So I will remove that. Then I will remove the profile value as well. Okay, because the profile value also it can pick it up from application.yaml. I will keep all other properties right here, and similarly here what I will do is I will keep only this much property and remove from here. So if I try to run here, my application will not work. See, it is failing because it needs some JPA related property, right? And it could not find all this property. So I need to find a way to inject this property into flight service. So the way we can do is, first of all, I need to go into the flight service and I will just enable this dependency. So the dependency is org Spring Framework Cloud Spring Cloud Starter config. This is the dependencies I need to add. And now I will have to add from where I can pick up this property. So I can pick up this property. So I need to add the configuration for that. So under the Spring config, I will add import, and the import is from where it will be able to pick up this property that I need to define. Under the application.yaml of the flight service, I will define those properties. So I can add configuration for that. So the property starts with the Spring config. Then I need to provide a import from where it will import this property. So then after I have to add a config server as a prefix, and then where is this property? It is coming from the localhost 8071, right? This is the port from where the Spring config server is started, right? 8071. So I just provided those details. Now I already have renamed this property name, application.property name, to flight service. And now first I need to start config server. So once the server gets started, I should be able to start my flight service. So the config server got started. Now I will start the flight service. And now if I look at it, I should be able to pick up this property and it won't fail, because earlier when we tried it failed because it was not able to find any of the H2 database dependency and all JPA dependency and everything. But now it is able to pick up those property from a config server here, and this is how we can incorporate. For example, if instead of the dev property, default property, if I want to add some other environment property, let's say I want to create some more property of the dev. Let's say this one is using some flight dev, okay, and this can run on some other server. Let's say it is running on a 8101, okay. So I can do that as well, and in the application.yaml of the flight service I can go ahead and here I can say, okay, instead of the active profile as a default, I can say that, okay, instead of this you can use the dev profile, because here, so what it will do is it will pick up those values. So what I'll do is I will restart this server. Now the server is restarted. Now I will restart a client now, that is a flight service. Now if you look at it, it will try to run this server on a specified port. So here the server is started and now it is running on the port that 8101 that we have defined into my flight service, right? Flight service dev. So this is how we can incorporate different environment. Now I will stop a server and also the client, and I will do the similar changes for other microservices as well. For example, this is my a passenger service, right? So I will take this property and I will move that the same property into, and I will rename that to passenger service. Then over here I will go into the passenger service. I will update the name to passenger service. I will update the profile. So let's say initially I want to use the default profile and I don't need the port number. I can remove other properties as well, because these all the properties are available here, and I can remove these default properties of the service name and everything right here. And now I also need to see whether the dependency is available or not. So, and not this one, I need to go into the passenger service POM, and I think I have got this dependency already available, Spring Cloud config. Now only thing that I need in application.yaml is to add the details of server, right, from where it will pick up this property. So I can pick up this same value from flight service and I add these values here. So this will pick up the value from the default. Now if I will do the similar change for the ticket service as well. So I'll go here and I will check whether ticket service as the dependency of the config server, a config client, right? Then I'll go here, I will copy this and I will move the property in the server. So here I need to rename this to ticket service. So the name is updated. Here I will this one. So I don't need these values. And now I will go into the ticket service application.yaml. I just need only those properties, everything else I can remove. Okay, now I will start the server first, and one by one I will start adding starting these services, microservices. My server got started. Now let me start flight service first. Then let us see all the things are working fine. So it is saying the fetching the configuration from 8761, right? Then I can go ahead and check for passenger service again. Again here also it is fetching the configuration. We will see once it is started. So the server is started and fetching the configuration from the config server. And let me start the ticket service again. So now it also started. So make it start, I had to do some changes into ticket service application because it was using a load balancer, because for other from where I have pushed I have got this is using the load balancer there. So I change it to localhost, the failing client I am using of the flight service. So I am using 8100, and similarly for the passenger service it is using the URL as a 8200. So I change that and now it is working. So we are able to fetch all the properties from some other places, right? The config server, I mean. So I can do the similar thing that I have done for the flight service. I can create some different environment as well, and I can push all the properties. So this is how we can create the config server and config client. In the initial discussion, what I was saying is we can centralize a property at one central place, and also we can use the different environment as well, and that makes our life much more easier to manage all the properties. So this is how we can use the config server and config client that can utilize the property defined into the config server. One more thing that I wanted to show is, if I go into a server, like if I want to check the properties of flight service, I should be able to see those properties that I have defined, right? The same property I can see here again, and again for the passenger service I can see the same properties this way as well, and ticket service again. So I can fetch this property, and for the flight service I also have the dev property again, right? Flight service default and also dev. Yes, it is able to fetch a dev property and flight default property as well. For the other, we have not defined a dev property, so it may not fetch. For example, if I check and I have not defined the dev property, so it is not fetching the dev property, it is just fetching the default property. So this is all I wanted to discuss about the config server and config server client. I hope you have understood the concept that I was trying to explain, and thank you for watching this video.